The world had no idea Keanu Reeves had always been a man who lived quietly in the shadows of his own fame, while most in his position craved attention. He preferred the small corners of life, morning walks in the park, quiet dinners with close friends, and work that spoke louder than any headline. Yet behind closed doors, a secret had been growing. One that would soon rewrite the story the world thought it knew about him. It began on a rainy night in Los Angeles, months before anyone would whisper the word marriage. Keanu was leaving a small art gallery where a charity event had just ended. He had been there to support a fundraiser for children's hospitals, but the night hadn't gone as planned. Photographers had gathered outside, despite it being a private event, their flashes cutting through the rain like lightning. He moved past them politely, offering small nods but no words. Then, through the chaos, he saw her Alexandra grandstanding near the curb under a single umbrella, waiting for her car. Her silver hair caught the dim streetlight, her eyes calm despite the noise around them. It had been weeks since they had last spoken in person, both lost in their own projects. But in that instant the distance closed. Need a ride? As he stepped beside her, rain soaking the shoulders of his black coat, she smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. Only if you promise not to talk about the weather the whole way. He laughed, and they shared the umbrella as his driver pulled up. The city blurred past outside the windows, but inside the car, the quiet between them felt warm. They spoke about her latest art installation, about a book he had been reading, about everything and nothing at all. That night wasn't the first time they'd shared that kind of quiet. It was simply one of many. They had known each other for years, first as collaborators, then as friends, and slowly as something more. Theirs was not the kind of romance that shouted to be seen. It was built in moments no camera could capture, midnight phone calls shared, sketches in cafes, the comfort of knowing they could sit in silence without needing to fill it. But as their bond deepened, so did the challenge of keeping it away from the hungry eyes of the world. They had agreed early on. No public declarations, no red carpet performances. It wasn't about hiding in shame. It was about protecting something fragile and rare. Still, there were cracks in the wall they had built. Whispers in the industry. Blurred photographs on gossip sites. Questions during interviews he would politely brush aside. Each time, Alexandra would smile knowingly and change the subject. But Keanu could see the way her shoulders tightened whenever their private life was reduced to a headline. Then came the moment that began to shift everything. Weeks later, they met at a small cabin outside the city, a place they often retreated to when the noise grew too loud, over a simple dinner by the fire. Keanu took her hand across the table. "I don't care about the noise anymore," he said quietly. "I care about you, about us. I don't want to keep waiting for the perfect time. There's never going to be one." Alexandra's eyes softened, but she didn't answer right away. She studied him, as if weighing not the proposal itself, but what it would mean for the life they had built. Finally, she squeezed his hand and smiled. "Then let's do it," she said, "but our way, no spotlight, no spectacle, just us." And so began the plan for a wedding no one would know about, at least, not yet. The plan was simple, but simplicity often takes the most care. They decided it would happen quietly in a small coastal town in Northern California, a place where the ocean met the cliffs and the wind carried the smell of salt and pine. It was a town where no one would expect to find them, a place they had once stumbled upon during a road trip and fallen in love with. They picked a date in early spring, when the days were warming but the tourists had not yet arrived. Alexandra took charge of finding a local officiant and a small, family-owned inn that could host them. Keanu handled the details of travel, making sure there were no paper trails that could leak to the press. Even their closest friends were told little, just enough to understand they would be away for a few days. Still, secrecy has a way of creating tension. One evening, as they were packing at Keanu's home, Alexandra sat on the edge of the bed, her hands still over a half-folded dress. "Are you sure we can keep this from getting out?" she asked quietly. He looked up from his suitcase. "We've kept bigger things," he said with a faint smile. "And even if it does, it doesn't matter. Not compared to what we're about to do." Her smile returned, but he could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. Alexandra was not afraid of the world knowing they loved each other. She was afraid of the world turning their love into something cheap, something it could pick apart for entertainment. The day of their departure arrived with a soft, gray sky. They drove up the coast in Keanu's old motorcycle, the one that purred rather than roared, its sound nearly swallowed by the wind. Alexandra held on to him tightly, her hair streaming behind her, the ocean flashing into view every time the road curved. When they arrived at the inn, they were greeted by an older couple who ran the place. Their kindness was the kind that asked no questions, only offered warmth and fresh coffee. The inn had just 5 rooms, each with a view of the ocean. Theirs had a balcony where the waves crashed far below, the horizon fading into mist. That evening, they walked down to the rocky shore. The air was cool, the sand damp beneath their shoes. Alexandra slipped her hand into his. "It doesn't feel real yet," she said. "It will tomorrow," he replied, watching the sun dip toward the water. "Tomorrow, it's just us and the ocean." But even here, miles from the city, the past had a way of catching up as they returned to the inn. Keanu noticed a man at the far end of the lobby glancing their way not once, but several times. There was something familiar about his face, though Keanu couldn't place it. He didn't mention it to Alexandra, not wanting to cloud the night. But deep down, he felt it a small ripple in their quiet plan, one that might grow if they weren't careful. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a sky painted in soft gold and pale blue. The air smelled faintly of sea salt, and the waves below their balcony crashed in a slow, steady rhythm, as if the ocean itself was blessing the day. Alexandra was still asleep when Keanu stepped quietly outside, a cup of coffee warming his hands. He let the breeze run through his hair, trying to steady his thoughts. He wasn't nervous about marrying her. He had never been more certain of anything. But that man in the lobby last night kept drifting into his mind. It wasn't just the way the stranger had looked at them. It was the feeling that the look carried recognition. Keanu had spent years reading those moments in people he knew, when someone recognized him from the movies, and this hadn't been that. This had been different. By the time Alexandra woke, he had tucked the thought away. The day was too important to fill with suspicion. They had breakfast in the inn's small sunroom, the morning light spilling over the worn wooden tables. Owners smiled at them as they left, offering a quiet, have a beautiful day that carried a sincerity neither of them would forget. The ceremony was set for late afternoon, when the light would be soft and golden. Alexandra's dress was simple flowing ivory fabric that caught the breeze, and her hair was gathered loosely, small silver pins glinting like drops of light. Keanu wore a black suit with no tie, his shirt collar open, the look of a man who wanted comfort over spectacle. The officiant met them at the edge of a cliff where the land fell away into endless blue. There were no chairs, no guests, only them, the ocean, and the wind. As they stood facing each other, Keanu felt the rest of the world fade. Her voice trembled only once as she spoke her vows, her eyes locked on his the entire time. When it was his turn, his words came slow but steady, each one carrying the truth he had kept in his heart for years. When they exchanged rings, Alexandra's hands shook, but not from cold. Keanu brushed his thumb over her fingers, and in that moment, they weren't hiding from anything, they were simply living it. The kiss they shared at the end was quiet and deep, promise sealed, without needing the world's applause. Afterward, they walked down to the beach, leaving their shoes behind on the cliff path. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and the tide left thin pools of water that mirrored the sky. Keanu took her hand, drawing her close as they walked along the shoreline. It was then that he saw him again, the same man from the inn, standing at a distance near the rocks. This time, there was no mistaking it. He wasn't just a guest on holiday. He had a camera slung over his shoulder. Keanu stopped walking. Alexandra followed his gaze, her smile fading. "Do you know him?" she asked softly. "No," Keanu said, though his tone carried something heavier. "But I think he knows us." The man turned away quickly, pretending to photograph the waves, but Keanu's instincts told him this wasn't chance. Someone knew. They were here, And if that was true, they're quiet. Hidden wedding might not stay hidden for long. Asterisk, the rest of the walk along the beach was quiet, though not in the peaceful way it had been before. The sound of the waves no longer felt like a lullaby, it felt like a cover for something lurking just beyond the shore. Keanu kept his arm around Alexandra as they made their way back toward the inn, his mind already sorting through the possibilities inside. The lobby was empty. The owners greeted them warmly, unaware of what had just happened. Alexandra excused herself to their room, saying she wanted to change before dinner. Keanu lingered near the front desk, his eyes scanning the guest book that sat open on the counter. There it was, name written in quick, slanted handwriting. Michael Brenner. He didn't recognize it, but the town's inn only had 5 rooms, and Brenner's was the one at the end of the hall, the same direction the man had disappeared toward last night. Keanu thanked the owner politely and headed. Upstairs, Alexandra was sitting on the edge of the bed, her dress folded carefully over a chair. She looked up when he entered, reading his expression instantly. "It's not a coincidence, is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. And if he's a photographer, he could already have enough pictures to make this public." She sighed, pulling her knees up to her chest. "This was supposed to be ours, Keanu. Just ours." He sat beside her, his hand finding hers. "It still is. Even if the world finds out, they can't take away the fact that we did this our way. But I want to know who sent him, and why." As the sun began to set, they decided to have dinner in the inn's private dining nook instead of going out. Alexandra tried to focus on the moment, the soft candlelight, the fresh seafood, but she could feel the weight of the stranger's presence hanging over them halfway through the meal. Keanu excused himself and stepped out onto the balcony, his eyes scanning the darkening street below. That's when he saw Brenner again, leaning against a lamppost, speaking into his phone. Keanu couldn't hear the words, but the way the man kept glancing toward the inn told him enough. Someone was getting updates on their movements. When he returned to the table, Alexandra was watching him closely. "We can't confront him here," she said, her voice low. "If we do, he'll just leave with the photos, and we'll never know who's behind it." He nodded. "Then we keep him close enough to watch. We'll leave tomorrow morning, but not to go home?" Her brow furrowed. "Where then?" "Somewhere he can't blend into a crowd," Keanu said. "Somewhere we'll see him coming before he sees us." Alexandra studied him for a moment, then gave a small, determined nod. Neither of them knew it yet, but the decision to stay one step ahead would lead them into a discovery far deeper than an invasion of privacy, would reveal a betrayal from somewhere they never expected. The next morning, the sky was pale and cloudless, the kind of calm that felt deceptive. Keanu and Alexandra left the inn early, carrying only a small bag each. They told the owners they were taking a scenic ride before heading home.
It wasn't
A lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. Instead of turning south toward the city, Keanu steered the motorcycle inland, winding through narrow mountain roads. Alexandra held on to him, the wind rushing past, both of them alert for the sound of another engine behind them. After nearly an hour, they reached a remote lake surrounded by tall pines. There was only one small cabin on the far side, owned by a friend of Keanu's who used it as a writing retreat. It was private, quiet, and most importantly isolated. Once inside, Alexandra set down her bag and glanced toward the single dirt road leading to the cabin. "If he followed us, we'll know." Keanu nodded. "If he didn't, then maybe we just overthought it." But neither of them truly believed that. 2 hours passed in silence. They sat by the window, drinking coffee, pretending to read, but never turning the page. Then, just as the sun dipped low, the faint crunch of tires on gravel reached them. Keanu moved to the door and stepped outside. The figure that emerged from the trees wasn't Brenner, it was another man, tall, wearing a jacket zipped to the neck. He carried no camera, but there was something about his deliberate steps that set off alarm bells. "Looking for something," Keanu called out. The man stopped a few feet away, passing through. "Nice place you have here," his tone was. too casual, his eyes scanning the cabin as if memorizing every detail. Alexandra stepped into the doorway, and Keanu saw it the subtle way. The man's gaze shifted when he looked at her. Recognition. "You were at the inn," she said, her voice sharper now. The man hesitated, then smiled faintly. "And you're more important than you think, Ms. Grant." Keanu's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you," the man replied. "Just a story, one the world will pay for. If you don't give it to me, others will." Da-da. Words landed like stones. It wasn't just about photos, it was about selling their private life as a commodity. But before Keanu could respond, Alexandra stepped forward, her voice steady. "Then you should know something. You don't get to tell our story." "We do." The man's expression flickered as if he hadn't expected resistance. Without another word, he turned and walked back toward the trees. They watched until he was gone, the sound of his footsteps fading into the forest. Keanu exhaled slowly, his hand finding hers. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "No," Alexandra agreed. "But if they want to play this game, we'll decide the ending." What they didn't realize was that the ending would come sooner than they thought, and it wouldn't be in the way either of them imagined. Asterisk the next morning, Keanu and Alexandra returned to the coast. The air was crisp, the ocean restless, and the road ahead felt both open and uncertain. They had decided there was no point in running. Instead, they would take control of the story before anyone else could twist it. They stopped in a small seaside cafe where the tables were old, wood polished smooth by years of salt air. Alexandra sat across from Keanu, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. "If we tell them ourselves," she said quietly, "it won't be the version they want, but it'll be the truth." He nodded. "Oh. Then let's make it ours from start to finish." By afternoon, they had reached the little inn where they'd first stayed. The owners were surprised but happy to see them. Their warmth reminded Keanu why they'd chosen this place in the first place. It was real, untouched by the noise of the outside world. In their room, Alexandra set up her phone on the desk. No production lights, no makeup artists, no handlers. Just the two of them. She pressed record. Keanu spoke first. His voice was calm, measured, but there was a steady strength beneath it. "We didn't plan on sharing this so soon. We wanted it to be ours for as long as we could keep it. But life has a way of forcing choices. So here it is, we got married, quietly our way, and it's the best thing we've ever done." Alexandra leaned in, her smile gentle but sure. "We don't owe anyone the details. But we wanted you to hear it from us, not in a headline, not in a rumor. From us." They ended the video there. No hashtags, no clickbait, just truth. Within hours of posting, messages poured in. Friends, fans, strangers from around the world congratulated them, not for the spectacle, but for the way they had done it. The so-called exclusive photos never appeared without the mystery to exploit. The people who had followed them lost their grip on the story. That evening, as they walked back to the cliff where they had exchanged vows, the sky was a deep wash of orange and rose, the ocean below breathing in slow, endless waves. Keanu took Alexandra's hand. "We didn't just keep it ours," he said softly. "We made sure it stayed ours, even after telling the world." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And now we can live it without hiding, without explaining, just living." As the last light faded, they stood there together, knowing they had faced the intrusion, the noise, and the risk, and won not by fighting louder, but by holding tighter to the quiet they had built.